end the meeting, you'll get a pop-up about it.
Okay. All right. That sounds great.
So wait for that after you end the meeting.
All right. All right. So let's make it official. The meeting was called to order earlier, but now we're going to start the meeting that we're recording. Did previously mention there'll be a time for the public to comment. Frank Rossi, is that Frank Rossi or Frank Rossi Jr. on the call tonight?
You remember
that. Never at a loss for words, Frank. I'm surprised you don't speak up.
Well, actually, my audio is a little bit off on my end, so I just barely heard you. It's Frank Rossi Jr. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, just glad you're with us.
Thank you.
So we're going to go over an application here that's kind of gotten hung up on some formalities. So what we're looking to do in this meeting is accomplish just a train of thought on how we're going to approach this application. There's two hang-ups essentially. And Stephanie, please feel free to step in if I'm not saying this correctly, as it's a little bit confusing. The application is for a very simple modification to a structure. The problem is this was granted a use variance back in 1998. Our current code states that a non-conforming use structure cannot be structurally altered. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we allow a renovation, or if a renovation is appropriate to be allowed within the village under the conditions that this application was previously reviewed. So I guess where we want to start is understanding how do we first identify this parcel. And for those, like, is everybody up to speed as far as the zoning board on what we're looking at here? Have you had a chance to read the application Sherry sent out earlier?
Well, it may make sense to let the applicant make their case and then have the discussion about it.
Okay, all right.
And Frank could take us through what they want to present to the board, and then we can respond.
Okay, yeah, no, I was trying to set the table and then let Frank pose the question, but yeah, that works as well. Frank, if you want to kind of let us know what you're looking to accomplish, we'd be glad to kind of start the discussion from that point.
Yeah. My problem is that I have no parking at all. My building basically takes up almost the entire footprint of my land. And in the last 20 years or so, I've always parked on the adjacent lot that was, at the time, was originally owned by Reserve America, as well as my employees. Since that property was sold along with the high school across the street to Stepping Star, they've asked us not to park on their parking lot for liability reasons. We don't have any parking on the street in front of our building. There's a no parking sign. And behind the building, Middlebrook Avenue is narrow, and firemen rushing to the fire station often use that path. So that for me to park a truck or a trailer behind my building is an impediment to people getting to the fire department. Additionally, in the winter, the town doesn't like me parking on Middlebrook because they can't plow snow as they would like to. So they've often come to me and asked me to move my vehicles off of Middlebrook and to park on South Street. But I don't have parking on South Street, so I'm really between a rock and a hard place. Our request is to put an overhead door, a garage door in the front of my building so that I can drive into my building and have two parking spaces. One for a trailer, the other for a truck. Last winter, I had the trailer parked on the street and vandalized. The brake lines were cut. but we don't know who did that. I reported it to the police, and there was no suspect found. Additionally, the people who live behind me on Middlebrook, previously that was Sarah and Dick. Of course, Dick has passed away. They asked me not to park behind my building because they use that parking lot behind my building for their guest parking. The new owner has told me the same thing, that the parking space behind my building is for their guests. So I've got nowhere to go. And I can't do business this way because my employees have no place to park. And guests clients who come to the building have no place to park either. If I could create an opening in the front of my building to bring 2 vehicles in, that would at least free up a possible parking space on South Street further down the street that we would have taken up with our employees. I understand that the building is a non-conforming use in a residential district, and we understand what the zoning laws dictate regarding this. However, we're not changing the footprint of the building at all. We're not suggesting that we need more space. We just want to work within the existing building itself. Tim, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that, but please do.
Yeah, hello. This is Tim Wade with Verdant Architecture. I guess the only thing I would add to that is that the intended use being parking would be mainly for Frank's vehicles that he uses for day-to-day construction, meaning that the traffic flow associated with that would be very minimal. It wouldn't be like there would be people coming in and out of that garage. The extent to which Frank meets with clients is also very minimal. It's not a continual type of business where there's multiple clientele coming in all day long. You know, there may be a need for parking from time to time, but I guess the point of all that is that it being a residential neighborhood and it being a street that gets traveled by locals, that by introducing an overhead door and adding interior parking to the building, there will not be a significant impact on any of the traffic patterns in the neighborhood. So I think that's the only point that I would add.
Okay. This is a relatively simple request that typically wouldn't require zoning approval. So kind of further elaborating on what Frank's talking about, he's in a condition that non-conforming use cannot be structurally altered. So that brings us back to our court. And what we're looking to accomplish this evening is determine a best course of action for there to be a vote at the next meeting. We want to understand how to best represent the village going forward with this type of discussion, because there are other non-conforming uses. We want to act appropriately. So, Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on this? I know that you and I had spoken before about what's the best way to bring this to light. And truly, to clarify the question from the applicant is on our mind. And I guess I'm interpreting from Frank that he has something he wants to do, and he's not exactly sure how to accomplish it. So I guess we might need to I guess clarify the question for us to appropriately address it. Whether one, we have to revisit the use variance again, or two, can we just issue some type of variance request just within the non-conforming rule that was previously generated. So I guess I'm gonna reach out to you and see if you can help us with this a little bit.
Sure. There doesn't appear to be an easy path. You know, I've been doing this for many, whoops. Is hearing like a, let me just check my audio settings. See if that stops the problem. I'm hearing like a background noise. So there doesn't appear to be a real easy path here. So it seems like the board has probably a couple of different options. One would be to have the applicant go through the process of the use variance again. The problem is use isn't changing. And so, you know, whether you want to make the applicant go through that process and whether you could, I don't know that that's possible. One of the options I also evaluated with Tim when I was speaking with him about this is that perhaps the zoning board, and this was the application I thought he was going to make to us, but it doesn't appear to be in the record and probably needs to be clarified to have a better record. But the application I thought he was going to make was to seek an interpretation about whether this section 205 section 61 could be varied, and if it could be varied, would that be an area variance or use variance? That section is the one that talks about no structural alterations are permitted in buildings that are non-conforming uses. And you know, the purpose of the variance is to modify those provisions of a code which for whatever reason an applicant can't meet. Typically it's setbacks, it's height, it's dimensional relief, or something in the use table triggers need for a use variance. But you get creative, and this is not my decision and I'm not giving guidance. I'm just saying if I were representing an applicant, the application I probably would have brought would be to seek a variant or to seek the interpretation from the zoning board about whether you could vary this structural alteration provision. If you could, which standard does it fall under? And I think that's probably a fruitful discussion to me, absent the applicant coming forward with something. It's kind of weird because we've got an application, we know what they want to do, but they're not providing us a path to it. So they're saying, you know, this is what I want to end up with, but like figure it out. And, you know, one response could be go find an attorney, have them do the research and you figure it out, or we could kind of help them through the process here a little bit. And that would be the way I would do it. If Tim or Frank hired me to come and represent them, I think that would be the argument.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
So if I may, just to clarify, on our application that we submitted, we checked 2 boxes on that application. One, we were requesting an interpretation, as Stephanie has noted, requesting an interpretation of the zoning ordinance, which is requested to define the following sections of the zoning law to resolve the following apparent inconsistency in the law. So for that interpretation, we were requesting some sort of interpretation as to what variance direction we're going to head with this based on section 205.61, which is directed at structural structural alterations relative to an existing non-conforming building. So you're correct, Stephanie, that would be the first step, is to say, okay, we have this law that applies to our building. We have a use variance. We technically aren't making any changes to the building footprint, so there's no area associated with the proposed changes. So I guess we would be trying to seek relief from section 205.61 relative to the use of the building, but how does that fold into a variance motion? I guess would be the question. So we're seeing an interpretation.
Yeah. Stephanie, can the applicant seek relief from a specific item of our code?
I think that's the purpose of your interpretation. So
Yeah.
to kind of guide you in that, I think everybody ought to be looking at 205.71 of your code. And that provision has what the purpose of an area variance is and what the purpose of a use variance is. And so it might make sense for this board to be, taking a look at those provisions. To think that either one of those could apply to what they're asking for, which really is relief from that 205.61 provision, which says you can't make structural changes to a non-conforming use. I think what the applicant's trying to do is make a structural change. So I think you're trying to vary that part of the code, and that's exactly what variances are for. It's because sometimes the code isn't one size fits all, and so this is unusual in the way it's applied, because most of the times it's the charts we're working with, it's setbacks, it might be green space, it's dimensional relief, or it's, we want to put in a restaurant, but only hotels are allowed. So that would be the use component of it. It doesn't sound like they're modifying their use in any way, shape, or form. And so the board may decide that provision seems to be dimensional relief, and that's the appropriate standard. And if that's what the board decides, then I think they modify the application to be specific towards the area variance standards, and that's what you would be deciding at the next meeting. But this is your, this is the board's decision, not mine.
All right. Let me try and navigate this, Sherry, to put our board kind of in some direction here and get some traction to help the applicant along. Because I know what you're asking. Essentially, I agree with. You do want to seek an interpretation specifically related to 205.61. We want to see if a variance can be made to that item. And I guess as a board, we can have a discussion on the area versus the use, and kind of understand where we want to go. We're not going to vote on this. This is just going to be a discussion that we can arrive at. So when this comes before us, we'll be prepared at the next meeting, and we'll be able to vote. So I guess I'll open it up, to anybody who wants to start the discussion on how they're going to look at this application.
Hey, Paul,
Yeah.
did you get my text? Dave LaFountain is trying to get in.
Yeah, I searched the waiting room, and I didn't see anybody in there. So
He
hang
said
on.
it's-
I just received a new invite.
Okay.
Let's see if he popped in there. Dave, are you on board here?
Yes.
Let's see. All right.
Yes.
Sorry about
I'm
that.
here.
I just had a note from Sherry. You were trying to get in, and I just had a message pop up as well. Sorry about that.
Can you
Okay.
mute yours when you're not speaking? Yours may have some feedback.
Is that Dave?
Nope, Sherry.
Sherry, okay.
Mhm.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. So everybody, Dave is our building inspector in town. Thanks for joining us.
I might have been here sooner, but I dialed in and it immediately put me on hold.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I'm glad you're with us now.
Okay.
So what, Dave, just to get you up to speed, we kind of reviewed the application. Stephanie kind of made some interpretations on our end and just really discussion points for us to look at when we're going through this application. Again, it's a very simple application with a complicated, unfortunately, set of guidelines that it has to operate in. They want to put a garage door in. It's a non-conforming use that was previously granted, and now they want to change the structure. So, I mean, everybody, if we look at what they're trying to do here, they're not impeding on the footprint, and they're seeking to relieve some of the issues that Frank presented. We just have to figure out a framework that can appropriately bring this to our board, and we can make a motion on. So I don't think that we can change the use at all on this. And it's, looking at past cases.
They're looking for a
Go ahead.
change of use. They're not looking for a change of use.
Right. So then that's where I'm going with this. We're going to have to put this into an area variance just by default. Is that what you're thinking, Stephanie?
I think the board needs to literally pull up 205-71 and read it. So area variance, this is a variance involving dimensional deviations from the standards set forth in this chapter. When, because of the specific parcel or because of extraordinary topographic conditions or other physical conditions or locations of the specific parcel, the strict application of the provisions of this chapter actually prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of the land or the building for which such variance is sought, et cetera, et cetera. I think you guys have to look at this language and make a determination about whether you think deviation from 61 is allowed, and if it is, does it fall under area or use?
And guys, to give you a heads up, she's on 205-71, item letter D, subsection 1.
D1 and D2.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, D1 and D2.
Yep.
And I think just reading that language and kind of talking through, the board talking through, like, does this seem to fit? Is this what the intent is of the code provision? Is it to allow these other things, or is it only to allow deviations from the chart? And I think that's kind of what you need to weigh in on.
Do you guys want to read this out loud and put it to group discussion?
Well, I don't have my book with me, but if you guys read, I'll listen.
Okay. So Stephanie read the first part of item 1, and where she left off is, in making its determination, the Zoning Board of Appeals shall take into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted as weighted against the detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or community by such grant. In making such determination, the board shall also consider the following.
And then those are just the standards.
Yeah, so before Stephanie, I was gonna just address that real quick and then kind of go through the bullet points, if that makes sense.
But I don't think that's the issue. Those standards are what they're gonna have to put in their application. Either they're doing A through E under area variance, or they're doing A through D under use variances. Those standards have nothing to do with what you're deciding here, which is part of the reason why I stopped talking.
Okay, so that's fair. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
what we're looking to agree on is, if we all agree this is the way to go, then the applicant has to match the criteria laid forward.
You're just
So-
trying to tell them
Yeah.
which criteria they're using. Are they using area, or are they using use? Or are they just out of luck and stuck with their situation, which is
Yeah.
also a possible decision, that there's nothing they can do, and, you know.
All right, so
But
I'm gonna
the language.
I'm gonna ask for some comments from our board, just to kind of understand where our thoughts are. Before I give my determination, John, would you mind making a few comments on if you think it's area or use variance, and if you agree with kind of what Stephanie's talking about?
I would say it seems like more like a use variance. Now you're parking vehicles inside, you're using it for more than just storage. It's more of a garage now. Your area is not changing. You still the amount of same amount of space, same amount of usage of the land.
Okay.
I mean, one thing you do have is with the amount of traffic on that road, you've got to be able to turn a truck and back a trailer into that garage, which could cause traffic issues, but that's another set of.
All right, good point. So you're kind of leaning towards use. Mr. Jerzak, would you mind making a few comments for us on what you're thinking about here?
I wasn't like John said. I'm thinking also use variance, but the fact that you're going to be backing trailers in, because otherwise it was just cars or trucks, without a trailer. I don't think it would impact the traffic flow at all on South Street. It might slow it down a little because my parents lived there for years. I lived there, and it was just a speedway. But the trailer issue could be an impact on traffic, but like he has stated, the applicant has stated, there's no parking available. So I don't know.
Okay, no, it's
I'm
a
kind of
it's a
with you
tough-
on this. That's all I got.
okay.
Yeah,
No, this is.
May
Go
I
ahead.
just refocus? So whether the traffic works or not, I think would be an issue for the planning board when they're dealing with kind of the site plan review, which is, I think, the second step of this, from what Dave has stated in his decision. I think we really just need to focus on whether structural, whether the code provision, which says there are no structural alterations, is that provision dimensional relief or use relief? That's the issue that we're addressing here. Is 20561 says you can't change a structure, and that's what they're looking for relief from, that provision. And that's the provision that the building inspector said this project violated. And so is that provision, which says you can't alter a structure, would that be an area variance or would that be a use variance? It has little to do with what they're actually requesting. It's really, how do we fix
Oh.
a problem with 20561, which says you can't alter a structure in a non-conforming use.
So again, and Stephanie, I'm just trying to have the dialogue so I completely understand it.
Yeah.
Would they then come back and request relief?
Yep.
Okay.
So
All
you guys are really just trying to give them the path. If they want to get relief from 20561, which is the problem that they're up against, how do they make that relief? Not whether you're going to grant it or not grant it, just which standards does that fall under? Is the prohibition on changing a structure something that falls under the area variance definition as set forth in this code, or is no structural alterations a use variance because it pertains to the use? I feel like I'm throwing you guys a softball, but it's I'm not.
Yeah.
Paul,
Yeah, Tim, go ahead.
this is Dave.
Oh, Dave, go ahead. Sorry about that.
I think one thing that would help here would be to think about the intention of that section when it was written. And my interpretation or my thought is that was written to prevent somebody who has a non-conforming use from expanding it to the point of making it grossly bigger, or making it even more in need of a variance or a use variance or an area variance. But I
Less
think
in
that in this
conformance.
case, what's that?
Less in conformance than,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
what was already granted. Yep.
Right.
Mm.
So I think that was, and I don't know, I wasn't there, but I kind of use it as a guide towards that is what the intended purpose is. I don't think that in this case, the alteration to the structure is going to make it any more or any less non-conforming than it was before they did this. It's not like they're adding another story, or it's not like they're adding, another piece to the building, which makes it bigger, makes it structurally larger.
Right.
They're
Mhm.
altering the structure within the confines of the existing structure. But I think if you look at it from what the intended purpose was, it may make it easier to move it forward one way or the other.
And I had a chance to read the minutes from the meeting back when this was originally granted. And actually, Ed Furneaux made the motion that the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Village of Ballston Spa, grant a use variance for 81 South Street in the R1 district for a warehouse and shop on the first floor, office space on the second floor. So, I mean, it sounds like there's already a garage door there. They're just making a larger garage door. Is that correct?
Well, yes, that is true. We have a double door that opens to 7 feet wide, and that allows us to bring materials into the building. But if we would like to change that so that we actually have an overhead door and then a single man door that is the entrance to the building. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. I mean, Dave, I agree with your train of thought where we don't want to take what was originally intended and give it the opportunity to become, worse or more non-conforming. So, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And, I think that in my mind, it's not going in that direction. But, I want to make sure that this is something that the village feels as well. And, having feedback from the board is important. So, well, Stephanie, I think what I'm missing here is the correct language to move this along. And I know you don't want to give it to us, but we should arrive at it on our own.
Here's a question. Is the use
Yep.
changing? Frank, Tim, is the
The
use
answer
changing?
is no.
There
Yeah.
we go. I think that's your answer, Board.
Yeah.
So if the use is not changing, it might be an area variance.
Well, I mean,
I'm
So looking
throwing the softballs. Nobody's.
that's a good softball. It depends on how hard you hit it to see how far it goes, though. When you look at the language in 205-71, specifically related to area variance, it says this is a variance involving dimensional deviations from the standards set forth in this chapter. And I guess technically, I'm assuming that those standards are related to property, right? Site boundaries and height and bulk.
Mm.
But it's every standard in the zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, while we were talking, if you guys did have the chance to go through the 205.71, the use and the area, if you give those a good read, I based on conversation, I am kind of leaning towards area as well. It'll be a much easier track.
Well, I have another question regarding that, because when I read a use variance, a use variance would be granted to alleviate a clearly demonstrable hardship, which would be that we don't have parking. And then if you read further, it says, which conditions are peculiar to such land or building and do not apply generally to land or buildings in the vicinity.
Mm.
And you're gonna have to start looking at hardship as being self-imposed. You know, the hardship's a word that we look at regularly, and making sure that, you know, this isn't something that you guys willingly got into, and now all of a sudden you don't want to be in that situation. That's something that we as a board have to consider as well.
Correct.
Is it? Yeah.
Agreed. And I think by nature, you know, Frank hasn't made his lot smaller over the years. So inherently, the lot does not allow parking.
No, nor has it ever. Is that correct?
Nor has it ever.
Correct.
So that's the hardship that I would say that, you know, is a demonstrable hardship.
Well, again, this is a structure that you purchased knowing the dimensions and have operated in since the date of purchase and the use variance was granted.
The issue is, if I may interject, is that when we bought the building in 1989, right, 30 years ago, our business has grown. And so the hardship is that we can't grow our business. I don't know where that falls in terms of whether or not the hardship is self-imposed or not, but we're between a rock and a hard place. We have to either go someplace else or get relief from the village so that we can continue to do business. And I don't know if that's a reasonable reason from the zoning board's point of view, but that's the fact.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. And I do want to make a comment that this entire board really is interested in seeing a good growth pattern for the village. And, you know, exceptions and variances are often granted to help the village grow in that manner. So by no means I want you to think that we're excluding you or not giving you the chance. We want to see your business continue to grow. So
thank you. I didn't question that at all.
Yeah.
I understand that there's a lot of goodwill here and you're trying to help us. So let's continue the conversation. How can we move forward?
all right. Trying to set this framework up is a little trying here. I'm trying to pan the board as well as listening to our attorneys, or our attorney Stephanie, which I greatly value your opinion. It seems like to me there's no change in the use whatsoever. The building is not really being altered to have any significant change. The change we're looking at is a dimensional change on the garage door on the property. So it doesn't fit the typical definition of an area, but requesting relief from that portion of the code might prove to be easier in addressing this issue, if that makes sense. So, all right, let me try and clarify this again. Stephanie, I guess I want to make I don't know if it's okay if you guys, I mean, I guess I'm not hearing a lot of feedback from the board, and that's really what I'm looking to kind of harness to see if anything has changed. Let me pose the question here. Based on the current conversation that just occurred, Jim, John, Anna, have any of you changed your positioning on the use variance versus looking at the area variance conversation we just had? That's where these Zoom meetings are a little tough. It's tough to get people to speak up.
I don't
So,
know if anybody
John-
wants to weigh in, but John was talking, sorry.
No, Bernadette, go ahead.
No, I was just listening to you all who have more experience than me. I think, Paul, you talking it out, trying to figure out what Stephanie's telling us, perhaps, but I think that the area variance, if we're defining that as a dimensional relief sort of pathway, I do think that makes sense. And I at the very least, to give us a framework to work with and you know, to continue discussions. I personally, and maybe someone else can weigh in more, but I do believe a garage, if they're already having storage and, you know, having warehouse sort of use there, I don't see a garage as that far off.
Right.
So I would feel comfortable with that. I don't know about anyone else, but.
All right, thanks, Bernadette. John, can you make some comments on this?
Yeah, after talking through, I do see how you could do it as an area variance over a use variance. So that kind of does make sense now after talking it through.
Okay. Jim?
That makes perfect sense to me to go with area variance. That's the way to go, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Anna, could you send me a quick text? I know your microphone's not working. Just on your current thoughts about this. So, Frank and Tim, as you're here tonight, essentially we are not going to vote on this. We just want to have you present for the discussion, and kind of be present during our interpretation, and make sure it aligns with what your exact request is and how you're going to pose the question. So, let me just make sure I get a comment from Anna before we open it up to public comment. I'm sure she's diligently texting right now. And Stephanie, are you okay with kind of the direction we're going here? All right, Anna is good with the area variance as well. So it looks like we're kind of interpreting this to be addressed more appropriately through an area request in the framework that Stephanie was talking about. So you guys are on the right path. Let's zero back in on a relief from that original request, if that makes sense. Let me open this up to public discussion. Actually, before I do that, Stephanie, is there anything you want to add before we open it up to public discussion?
I have one more thing I want to add, just because I'm afraid I'm going to forget it before the end of the meeting. Procedurally, and it might be helpful for people who've been on the board longer than I've been. This code has been a challenge to work with, and the public hearing portion says that you have to mail notice to property owners, but it doesn't give dimensional relief. Do you guys normally do 250 feet for area variances? I checked the village law, which doesn't give any guidance, and in most codes, I'm used to neighbor notification stating 250 feet for area variances, 500 feet for use variances, but I'm not seeing any provisions in here, and I'm just hoping somebody who's been on the board for a while knows. Part of the reason you can't vote tonight is because we didn't get neighbor notices out.
No.
We didn't do that in part because there's no guidance on.
Correct. Stephanie, I don't know. Rory, are you still on the phone?
I don't see him on there.
All right, Rory did have, we have had discussions on this, and I think you're right, Stephanie. It's not very clearly defined. So that will need to be brought up. And I think what we'll do is, why don't we broadcast? I mean, in your experience with other municipalities, is there a maximum, like 500 feet is typically what you see?
500 is for use variances because they have a much greater impact. 250
Yep.
would be normal for area variances. And in the absence of the board having any idea what you've done in the past, I would say that going with 250 feet makes sense. I've already flagged this as language for the code revision committee to address.
Yep.
Every time I read your code, I'm like, oh God.
I know.
Yeah.
It definitely needs a lot of work. There's no doubt.
So I
All right,
think
so let's
250 feet would be great. And if Tim and Frank can kind of flag that for the board and identify those, that would be helpful.
okay.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, if you guys can just search the tax maps for the 250 feet
Sure.
and provide us with a list so we can
Yep.
verify it, then we can get those that list verified so that the notices can go out so that you can vote at the next meeting.
For 250 feet.
Yep, correct. All right. I don't think we have a further comment on our end. Is there anything else that we want to talk about before we open it up for public comment? All right, I'm going to open up the discussion for public comment. Let me see here. Yeah, is anybody raising their hands here? I don't see anybody. Oh, hey, Liz, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I concur with Stephanie that this needs to be addressed in our code. And the non-conforming, because we may want non-conforming buildings to change if it makes sense. I'm just curious if the applicant had exhausted all possibilities for finding additional parking spaces. You know, the village just signed a shared parking arrangement with VOC where they took care of the liability issue with insurance. So I was wondering, you know, if that's something you had tried already to see if you could lease some spaces from your neighbors.
I did. I offered to lease space from Stepping Star, who owns the parking lot adjacent to me. I also offered to buy part of it, and all my requests were turned down.
Yeah, and that's too bad because normally, you know, neighbors can help neighbors if they don't often use all their parking. That's basically it.
All right, sounds great. Alex, I saw you're a member of the public joining in. Do you have any comment?
No comments, thanks.
Okay, great. All right, we're gonna close the public comment portion of the meeting. And one thing before I end the meeting, I did not have the minutes approved from the previous meeting back in April. I don't know if I heard somebody trying to speak there or not, but I do want to make a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on April 29th, 2020.
It's John Luciani. I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Anna just texted aye. Thank you, Anna. Okay,
Hey,
so
Paul? Hey, Paul?
yeah, go ahead.
The ones from I think it was the January meeting as well, were never approved.
Oh, really?
Because February, there weren't enough members that were at the January one to vote, and then it never got voted on at the April meeting. That's why I sent those as well.
Okay. Those are a little bit longer minutes. If you guys want to take a minute, I'll actually have those on the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay.
Just in the order of being conscious of time here.
Yep.
But no, Stephanie, do you have any objections for me closing the meeting at this point?
No, I think we just want to get clarification that the applicants are going to just submit a new application under the area variance standards, making their arguments consistent with these provisions, and then also providing with that just a list of the neighbors within 250 feet so we can verify and notify those.
Yes, I think that's the best path forward. I think it's the only path forward.
Yep.
And I want to thank everyone very much on this beautiful evening for coming inside and listening to our issue. I really appreciate it because I know you'd much rather all be outside. So we will move forward with a new request, and it will be for an area variance.
Okay. Sounds great. Tim and Frank, thanks for your patience and working with us too. I know this is not a typical application, so we appreciate you working with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks guys. Meeting is called at 7:43 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Don't forget to save the recording.
Yep, I will. I'll send it over. Yep,
Good.
thanks.